Hi, Federalist 47 Part 1, Federalists 47 through 51 by James Madison are very important. Here he starts talking about separation of powers and why it is necessary to have it in place for government not to be able to crush your liberties, take your freedom away, either by a tyrant in the form of one person or tyrant in the shape of a legislature, a runaway legislature. So he's going to be talking about these things, and it's very important for why we are studying the Federalist Papers and the concept of federalism. He says that the people who are criticizing us, the anti-federalists, actually have some good points. They mention what Montesquieu, the great political philosopher, had said in his book, The Spirit of the Laws. He agrees with them, but he says maybe Montesquieu overlooked certain things when he studied the British system. Yes, British system is truly great, he says. He agrees with Montesquieu. But he says there are certain things that Montesquieu did not pay attention to. For example, one of the things that the anti-federalists criticize the federalists for, they say, well, the three departments, the three branches, judiciary, executive, and legislative, they have to be distinct, separate, totally separate from each other. And they say Montesquieu has said this too. But Madison says, no. We'll look at our state constitutions, we'll look at the British system, and we see that there's a partial, what he called partial agency. In other words, one department has a small say, a partial say, about what the other department does. This way, you won't have one branch run away with power. So keeps bringing these up, and you cannot have a free government if you don't have separation of powers. Imagine right now, year 2017, what would happen if the President of the United States had more power than he does now? We would be in trouble, because like we heard somewhere else, Federalists say you're not going to find good people in office all the time. You have to design the system so that when a bad person or persons get in the office, one way or the other, by lying, by taking advantage of what's going on in the country, the whole system won't coming down, won't be destroyed. Your liberty won't be destroyed. Your prosperity won't go by the wayside. So we'll go through 47 to 51 every few paragraphs. If I can think of something, I'll share it with you. One of the things that Madison and the founders knew was the writings of John Locke. They're very familiar with his writings. And one of the things that John Locke says, he doesn't mention it in this paper, but John Locke says that you have separation of powers for the rule of law to exist. And rule of law, what does that mean? That means that people who you elect, okay, will write the laws and everybody will know the law. He would use the word declared laws. In other words, everybody will know what law we are talking about. So you know what to do, what not to do, what rule applies to everybody. So one of the things you do by separation of powers and rule of law is that, okay, today you become a lawmaker, you get elected to become a lawmaker. Let's say you serve 2 years, 4 years, 10 years, but you know when you step down, you're no longer in office, that law is going to apply to you too, to your children, to your family. This way, people will remember that they better not think of being tyrants, being people that will not enforce the laws of anybody else, will not enforce the laws that need to be enforced, but will enforce only the laws that he or she thinks is the right law. So that's another way of going about saying why we need separation of powers. Because you want to have rule of law. And this law has to be declared. It has to be open, has to be public, it has to be equal to everybody, apply to everybody equally. These are important. We've talked about it before, that if you don't have separation of powers, if you don't have judicial independence, if you don't have elected officials that know for sure every 2 years, every 4 years, every 6 years there's going to be an election, you can't change that around. Then also, when Madison says here partial agency, he says you can't have these departments totally separated, and he uses the word partial agency. That's another aspect of checks and balances. So without checks and balances, you can't have a good government. So let me start reading Federalist number 47. Having reviewed the general form of the proposed government and the general mass of power allotted to it, I proceed to examine the particular structure of this government and the distribution of this mass of power among its constituent parts. One of the principal objections inculcated by the more respectable adversaries to the Constitution is its supposed violation of the political maxim that the legislative, executive, and judiciary departments ought to be separate and distinct. It's actually interesting. It's one of those few times that when he calls an adversary an anti-federalist, he's actually here respectful, more respectful than other times. Because a lot of times when he says our adversaries, their passion and emotion has got the best of them. They're not thinking clearly. But here, it's the first time that he actually is saying, yes, I agree with this adversary, with this anti-federalist, who probably was the famous anti-federalist that would go by the name Brutus. In the structure of the federal government, no regard, it is said, seems to have been paid to this essential precaution in favor of liberty. The several departments of power are distributed and blended in such a manner as at once to destroy all symmetry and beauty of form, and to expose some of the essential parts of the edifice to the danger of being crushed by the disproportionate weight of other parts. So far he agrees with him. He says, you don't want one branch to be so powerful to crush other branches. Then he continues, no political truth is certainly of greater intrinsic value or stamped with the authority of more enlightened patrons of liberty than that on which the objection is founded. The accumulation of all power, the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. So he agrees that this is the definition of tyranny, when you accumulate, concentrate power in the same hands. Doesn't matter which branch it is, which branch of the government, it's going to be, that is going to destroy your liberty. That's going to be tyranny. So he agrees with him. Since I'm running out of time in this video, I'll stop here and just let me remind you that especially for you immigrants and English language learners, that's why I'm reading this after all. Please make sure that you're reading along at least the first time you're going through these papers. After the first time, if you feel comfortable, you can listen. But the first time, it's very important that you read along. You have the book in front of you, or you actually have it on the screen of your computer, and listening to it. Thank you. We'll come back and restart actually with paragraph 3. I'll start all over.